Remember how we talked about compelling characters overcoming obstacles to achieve a worthy outcome, planet Earth? Will the outcome be survival, right? I had a birthday recently. It wasn't a big one, but it was big enough because they just get bigger. And I reflected that on, you talked about this, it made me think about this. On the day that I was born, there were 2.7 billion people on this planet. My dad, who's 92, suggests that there are pretty reasonable genes in the family. If I live to his age, there will be nearly 10 billion people on the planet. 2.7 to 10 billion in one lifetime. Think about that. And as these guys said, our students, you guys, you will be the ones who figure out whether and how we manage and work our way through this. Several of you have been doing these stories, as I mentioned, our Planet Forward correspondents and others, and we've got lots of StoryFest finalists. You've been telling fascinating stories, and we've gotten your student stories from all over the world, which is really pretty cool. I want to show you a very brief clip from one of them right now.
What if you knew you were one of the last of your kind? Meet Sudan. He is the last male of his kind. He is one of 3 northern white rhinos left in the entire world.
But that is good.
How could people be so selfish to kill an entire population just for their horns? Will Sudan last long enough to meet his grandchild? Will any of these rhinos be around to meet my children? What about your children?
So that piece was filed by Olivia Urbanski from Loyola University. She's going to come up here in a minute. Yes, that's Sudan. Did you read about Sudan? The last northern white rhino. He died on March 20th, and Olivia had an opportunity to see him and touch him and tell his story. So Olivia, come on up. Olivia Urbanski from Loyola University, Chicago, one of 15 Planet Forward correspondents. This year telling stories, our correspondents from around the world. Let me bring up some others. Harrison Watson from Jackson State. He was a 2017 Planet Forward correspondent. He went to Camp 41 with Tom Lovejoy last year. Anna Sumi from George Washington University, class of 17, SMPA, School of Media and Public Affairs. She is a Land O'Lakes Global Food Challenge alum, and she traveled to Siberia with the Arctic Pyre grant that we got. She'll tell you about that. Elaine Johnson from Yale National University of Singapore. She's here from Singapore, and she was a Planet Forward correspondent this year and a StoryFest finalist this year. And Zach Smith from the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry College, and he is a 2017 StoryFest finalist, went to Camp 41 with us as well. So would you start and tell us about how you got together with Sudan? And was that like the most amazing, that looks just so ridiculous, doesn't it, to kind of pet a rhino like that?
Yeah, so I was in Kenya. I was studying abroad there. And my study abroad program connected me with Olpejeta Conservancy. So I was living there for about 6 weeks, and I was able to meet Sudan and learn his story from the rangers who take care of him every day. And you know, there's this animal that's as large as a car that's like coming towards you, and he's very, very old. So he's pretty gentle, and I was able to touch him, and it was just the most life-changing experience, and unfortunately he is gone now. So there's only 2 left in the world, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to share his story. And
what did you want people to get from that story? I mean, yeah, we see you in Sudan, but as a storyteller, right? You want people to come away with something.
I think my main goal of my story was to have people to understand that humans were the ones who caused this species to have 2 left. Like, we are the reasons that there are only 2 northern white rhinos left in this world. And we need to do something about that. We can't let this happen to any other species. And I think that hearing his story, Sudan's story, and the rangers who care for him and who really spend their lives dedicated to these species, these animals, we need to protect them and not let this happen to any other species.
How was it being a Planet Forward correspondent this year?
It was phenomenal. A really great experience.
We did not pay her to say that. You edited with us. I mean, we edited your stories. So what was that process like? How'd that work?
Yeah, so I had never made a video before. It's my first time, and wow, kudos to all people in this realm. Like, that is tough stuff. Like, I spent so many hours doing that, and it's not perfect by any means, but you guys helped me so much with the editing. I can't thank you enough because I wouldn't have known where to start without you guys. So thank you to Plan It Forward.
Harrison, how you doing?
Pretty well.
We had a great time last year at Camp 41. So Harrison, introduce yourself to people. Tell them where you're from and what you're studying, what your interests are.
So I am a junior from Jackson State University over in Jackson, Mississippi. Currently studying. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I'm currently a biology major with an emphasis in environmental science. So I kind of want to study an extension of what Tom's doing in the rainforest, either there or with coral reefs, the ecological importance of biodiversity and what we can do ourselves to kind of sustain that and preserve it for future generations, not just of ourselves, but of the natural world.
Harrison, I remember when we were driving in Brazil together, we had a long conversation about your interests too in bringing science and religion together. And what did you mean by that, and why do you see that as a particular challenge that you're interested in?
Well, for me, I mean, especially on the trip to Camp 41, it was such a spiritual, thing. The natural world has a way of connecting oneself to themselves and to everything else. Unfortunately, I feel as we continue to progress in a way, we detach ourselves from that natural world. And so it's hard for people to return to the way those two pillars, the natural world and religion, connect both to ourselves and to one another. And so for me, a lot of my storytelling is sort of focusing on that narrative and focusing on just how intimately those two are related. And it's not easy, but when you have the opportunity to show people like Tom does and like you guys do, just how, I guess great that relationship still is, it makes the job, a little bit easier.
What kind of storytelling do you do?
I do a lot of literary writing, so a lot of, poetics and whatnot. It's a dying breed nowadays, so it's not the easiest thing to get across to people, but, going back to that idea of spirituality and the natural world, I feel like when you have the opportunity to connect a person through words, it's a lot more of an intimate relationship that you guys are sharing than with pictures, and that doesn't take away anything from anybody else. But I feel like when you take the time to read what somebody's writing on a piece of paper, it definitely draws you more into what it is that they're trying to say.
Anna Sumi, tell us about your travels with us.
So I did a lot. My first traveling was through the Global Food Challenge the first year.
Tell folks what the Global Food Challenge is.
So it's a bunch of students from different universities, people that I would never have had the opportunity to talk to, let alone be friends with, like Iowa State University, Minnesota, a few more.
Purdue,
yeah. And then we got to go to Malawi, Botswana, and Zambia and talk to farmers there. That Land O'Lakes was helping with their international division. But my favorite part was actually going to a co-op in Oregon and talking to the farmers there. Because I grew up in Wisconsin, and so I just see a lot of like soybeans and corn being grown. But in Oregon, they can grow, the diversity there is incredible. You could just drive and pick berries off the side of the road and eat them. So that was incredible. And so that was kind of my first taste of traveling and telling stories while traveling, because I had Dr. Cheers along with me in Africa for that. And then last summer, I went to Siberia.
So most of us go to Siberia once during the summer. It's cooler there.
It wasn't. It was hot. I didn't expect it to be hot, but it was really hot.
You spent a lot of time in a train too, didn't you?
48 hours train ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
First class?
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. So this is a research project that has paired with us, and they are studying urban sustainability in the Arctic. That is to say, cities and large towns. And what did you see?
So what's interesting about that is that they're built on permafrost, which is a permanent frozen layer. It has to be frozen for a few years to be designated as permafrost. And so the way that they build the cities there is completely different than the way we would build cities here. So they have to think about all of that. And what's happening now is that it's changing. And so going forward, how are these populations going to survive? How are their cities going to, and their infrastructure going to survive as this is rapidly changing?
How'd you tell the story?
Through videos.
So you shot videos.
I shot videos, I took pictures, tried to take as many notes as possible because I am not a scientist, and had so much to learn. And
So that's interesting. So how many are scientists or studying science in the room? All right. So did you find that your storytelling and their knowledge were far apart?
no, because I had to ask those questions so I understood it. So I liked that I came from that level because I was kind of coming at the stories the same way viewers would. So if I didn't understand it, then how could the people watching and reading what I produced, how would they understand it? So I was trying to bring them to the same level.
What was your big takeaway from the trip?
Climate change is happening really quickly there. It wasn't like Dennis was talking about change in pictures. That's like happening every year there. And people were calling it like the second summer because it's only now started to be that hot in the summer.
And residents themselves were noticing it and talking about it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Elaine, National University of Singapore, what's that?
So Yale NUS is the fruition of our motto is two great universities in Asia for the world. So Yale basically partnered with National University of Singapore and opened a school, and I'm their second graduating class.
And what are you studying in Singapore?
I'm studying environmental studies, which in the context of a city, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's given me a lot of opportunities to look at how urbanization, patterns of urbanization are affecting the way we relate with the environment.
And tell us about one of the stories that you filed as a correspondent from Singapore.
So I did a story on this organization called Ground Up Initiative, which as the name, it's a ground-up organization that is trying to reconnect people with the environment. So in Singapore, you live in an apartment. I live on the 22nd floor of a building, and so if I do yoga and they say try to feel the earth, I'm thinking the earth is 22 floors below me. So it's really about getting people to experience where does your food come from, because everything, our food, our water, comes from Malaysia. So there isn't so much of a connection with our food system, and I think when you're disconnected from what makes you who you are or what you consume, it also kind of disconnects you from your community and the people around you.
What do you want to do with this when you're done studying?
So I'm really interested in humanizing commodities. So my capstone project, which I just submitted before flying out here, was on coffee. Because we all...
Coffee, the kind I drink too much of every day?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I'm interested in telling stories about supply chains. So this one was about coffee from the Philippines. So most people don't know that Philippines makes coffee, but they do. And it's just kind of making a comeback, and it's just starting to be exported again. So I'm interested in telling those stories and going out and talking with farmers and seeing what their stake is and meeting the consumers who drink their coffee.
Why is story and telling those stories, why does that matter?
Why does telling stories matter? Well, we're all living the story that we think we should be living every day, or we're trying to attain to that, right? So I find when I ask people to tell me their stories, it's kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion. And every time you get to a point in their story and they say, and then I decided to become a farmer, and then I moved to Manila, and then I started to study this, and I ask why. And it's like they peel back a layer of who they are and kind of, what drives them and what are their motivations. And I think it's a real privilege to be able to get inside somebody's head and see why they why they are the way they are and why they are living the story that they think they should be living.
Zachary Smith, SUNY ESF. Your area of study was?
Environmental studies.
Toward what end?
Communication was my focus, and I guess the route that I ended up going down was podcasting.
So tell us about this podcasting. So last year, Zach sort of blew us away. Zach came here with a podcast that he had done up at SUNY ESF with someone called Robin Kimmerer, a professor up there, who was also the director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, correct? Yes. And we rolled this thing, and had you done a podcast before?
No, I'd...
Never done a podcast before. and this thing is sort of making magic. So how'd you do that?
So I kind of grew up listening to NPR, traveling back and forth to Virginia, visiting my father. He's a big NPR listener, and I hadn't actually listened to a podcast before I started the project, so I had to do a little research on what a podcast was. But I always liked sound, so rather than doing a written story, I figured that was the route that fit me.
When Zach was in the Amazon with us, he went everywhere with a microphone, recorded everything, right? What's the secret of a story, as far as you've done it, through podcast? What has to happen to make that resonate and connect?
Well, I think one of the beauties of sound is to take you to a location, personally, I think even better than video. To me, sound, literally vibration, can bring you to a place that, for me, video or pictures can't. No offense to Rich or Dennis that showed us all these amazing photos earlier, but there's something about when you hear a place, it brings you to it. So all of a sudden you are physically experiencing that location by the sound, and that stereo experience that you can get. At least that was my hope.
How many of you are podcast listeners? Who listens to podcasts? What's your favorite podcast? Yeah. 99%? Indivisible, right. Who's a podcaster over here, listener over here? What's your favorite one? Which? Okay, all right. Anybody else? Big podcast?
Welcome to Night Vale.
Welcome, okay. So we got a lot of podcast fans here. Isn't it too that there's an imagination going in your head? Like when I do a TV show, a TV piece, I'm going to show you the picture that I want you to look at, and I'm talking about it or somebody else. When you're doing it, you're engaging my imagination because I can't see that. So you're creating these sounds and word pictures for me, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And if you want to be able to paint an image close enough so you can relay your message, but allow people to paint their own image so they can create their own connection to that story. And that's really an important facet of it. So they create their own connection.
The city is doing a test. I heard this on TV.
The city is doing a test. What exactly is the city testing?
This is just a test. Warning, this is just a test.
It's like our countdown or something.
Okay, so for all of you who've come here from outside of Washington, it really is this weird most of the time. We just don't get noticed like this.
It would be between 10 and 11 and here.
Okay, but we're okay. We can keep going? Okay, all right. A couple more and then we're gonna move on. I wanna ask all of you in terms of, how you think doing this story stuff is gonna connect with where you're going or where you'd like to go in your lives, right? So Olivia, why don't you start that?
I think for me, in my career as an undergrad, I've been able to travel a lot of different places. I've been to Sweden, Alaska, Kenya, northern Minnesota, DC. So this storytelling has actually helped me to kind of bring all of my experiences together and connect them all together and help me understand where I want to go in the future. So it's been a great opportunity.
Harrison, how about you?
Connecting those two pillars, science and religion, humanizing research and making, jargon.
Emergency alert. A test of the Arlington County Wireless Emergency Alert System. No action is required. That's the part I'm most reassured by. Sorry, Harrison, go ahead.
Yeah, but just making all that scientific jargon, something that can be relatable and taking those two huge ideas and making them really personal.
And bringing them together in story where people from different perspectives perhaps can understand and listen. Anna?
Well, I'm only 23, so I don't really know what I want to do yet, but I think that storytelling is critical in everything that you do. It's how you relate to people, so I think that everyone kind of communicates through stories, so I don't really see going forward without them ever, or that being possible.
Elaine?
And, oh no, sorry.
Go ahead.
And I know that I'll always have an interest in agriculture and the earth, so I'll always be involved in that some way.
You're going to work in food and agriculture?
Yeah, I think food is one of the most accessible ways to talk to people about the earth.
Sure is. Elaine?
Yeah, what Anna just said, there's actually a saying in Malay that says, food is our most intimate connection with the earth. So your question was, how I see myself going forward. I want to be a journalist, and in a lot of my field work that I've done, I interact with a lot of farmers, and the stories that they've told me are just incredibly inspiring. And I think that if we can sort of amalgamate stories from all different sectors, a story from a coffee farmer, a story from a coffee drinker, there's going to be more humanity and compassion built in the world.
Zach?
For years I've been fascinated by the idea of relationship and relationship to environment, which is something that Dr. Kimura speaks a lot about, which is why I interviewed her. And so if I would have one goal in communication, it would be to help people realize that they can have their own connection with their environment, and that doesn't have to be the same as anybody else's. And through that, empower them to realize that they have their own story with the environment and what their difference can make and what their touch, their one drop of the ocean can raise.
I want to thank all of our student storytellers here, and then drop one little piece of news on you. We are actually working with Zach, and we have the support from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and we're working with PRX, which is a big podcast platform. And Zach is going to be working on a Planet Forward pilot podcast. And we're going to start our podcast. This is the fun stuff for me. It's right, like you said, next generation storytellers, this is it. You are it. So we hope to launch the podcast, to have the pilot that we can launch in the fall and distribute in the fall. We want to use our network of Planet Forward correspondents and others around to plug into it, to be storytellers and contribute to this. So we're really, really excited, but it's only a pilot. So Zach, baby, the pressure's on, okay? It may be a pilot of one, or this could be the launch of a whole new thing. Could you guys thank our students here? Thank you all very much. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you.